dat to you, Saints fans, and go Pelicans, as the Pelicans will be playing in the playoffs tonight. We'll talk about that a little bit with the Zion Williamson hamstring injury. That man, look, lots of props to be given to him for how he has handled things at the end of this season. And it ain't necessarily his fault that he can't stay away from the injury bug, but gosh, it's still rough. The Pelicans game is actually tomorrow, Wednesday at 8:30. But we'll talk about that. And then, of course, we talk about our New Orleans Saints with Mickey Loomis having an interview today with some highlights I'm sure y'all going to want to discuss and have opinions on. And we'll go through like just full things of what they said, all things. So we'll go through that. We'll go through those who are in the chat. Shout out to y'all if y'all are here in the show. As always, everybody's welcome. Everybody's loved. Who dat to you? You're all amazing. You're all incredible. And thank you for being part of the greatest nation in the world. Who dat nation? It's the NFL draft. It's basketball. It's everything. So, who dat to? Chase, Josh Santerre, Key, QFS, Slade Smith, James Griffon. We're going to see Marc Jean-Marie here. Mason Zalrao. I probably butchered your last name, my friend. Jeremy, I know TJ's around, and a couple others. Who dat to you? Welcome in. Love you. And also, it's a big day. Matt Ryan has officially retired from the NFL. Atlanta Falcons legend, Atlanta Falcons great. I will give him his flowers for that. Rest the laurels upon him. And also a great at letting Matt Ryan get sacked by Cameron Jordan, inflating sack numbers, and making Cameron Jordan arguably a Hall of Famer. Thank you, Matt Ryan. And we'll see you and what the future ends up holding. So we're going to talk about Zion in a little bit. But first, I want to talk about Mickey Loomis talking about, a little bit of everything. For me, the big highlights is offensive line and wide receiver getting a lot of talk. But I do want to highlight a couple other portions. And you can read some of this, whether it be on Canal Street Chronicles, New Orleans Football, ESPN. A lot of places have this covered, but that's why you come to the podcast. You don't have to do all that. We'll talk about it here. But here's what Mickey Loomis had to say today during his press conference about draft day trades. Instead of just playing the audio, I'm just going to say it, right? So he said, for us, we will look at, since we're at 14, what it takes to get to 13, what it takes to get to 12, 11, etc. That's probably about where you'll cut it off, being pick 8, as he wouldn't even look into trades going beyond that. So then he'll go back, and how far back are they want to go in terms of trading back? Says they'd go 10 spots in front and 10 spots behind, meaning they'd be willing to go all the way back to pick 24 if there was enough value, or even go as far up to, pick 8-ish, as he just said, if there is value. And then he said there'll be a lot of calls they'll be fielding over the next few days discussing this. And when asked, do they have an inclination to go forward or back, he said, basically he gave a non-answer. He said every GM is different, but we'll have an idea of what might be available. So basically, he wouldn't commit to either one. Obviously, if you've been following the New Orleans Saints for a while, he trades up. That's just what he does. And he's done that even before Sean Payton. He trades up in the draft. Doesn't mean he's never traded back. Just that he tends to trade up. That's his thing. That's his shtick. And it is non-answer time of the year. So I'm not even going to get super salty about him having non-answers. But I will say that you're at this point, it almost feels like a precipice for New Orleans. Like this could be a catalyst for great things or bad things with this team. Like it feels like they finally have put together the past 2 years something that could be a positive future. It's very murky waters though, right? I think that it would be good to know, obviously you don't want to kind of play your hand out there, because I have talked about how I feel like a lot of times when the New Orleans Saints make a trade, I feel like they're losing that end of the trade in terms of value. But like he said, they're willing to trade up to maybe even up to pick 8. That's where he stopped it, right? So taking what he said, if we're just going based on what he said, here's what that means. That means your New Orleans Saints could trade with the Atlanta Falcons, which technically could happen. Because you have Fontenot over there. There is a relationship. I would never recommend trading within your division, but that's that. Chicago, New York Jets, Minnesota, Denver, 2 picks ahead of us, and then Las Vegas. So you do have 2 potential partners there that there are great Mickey Loomis connections. Obviously, Denver is going to be Sean Payton, right? Ignoring all the Sean Payton drama. Ignoring all that stuff, right? All their weird quarterback evaluation things that they got going on, all the stuff that they're doing. There is still, shout out Zach Wilson, but come on, man, really? There is still the connection there. Maybe you get a trade. Then you also have the Atlanta Falcons, where we have a lot of New Orleans Saints personnel working in their front office now. So there are two opportunities that he is kind of listed there when he was going through the numbers of what New Orleans can do trading up. Personally, I would like them to trade back, but that's kind of always my thing. But if you look at who's there from pick 15 to 24, and I mentioned 10 picks because that's specifically what he says in this interview, you're talking about that being the Colts, Seahawks, Jaguars, Cincinnati Bengals, LA Rams, Pittsburgh, Miami, Philadelphia 22, then Minnesota and Dallas. With Philly being somebody that we've seen them trade multiple times with, but would we get a good deal out of that trade would be the question. Right now, for those curious, if we were talking about a potential trade back, if it was to happen, Philly does have a second-round pick at pick number 53. They also have a third-round pick that you could go after if you wanted to. Actually, they don't have a third-round pick. I apologize. They don't have a third-round pick. They do have a second-round pick that you could try to get in a deal. Would that be good value to pick up pick 53 or pick 50 rather and do that? No, honestly not. I wouldn't be happy with them losing 10 first-round spots for pick 50, but I guess that would be a New Orleans-type trade. I don't necessarily think there's probably as much value there. There also is pick 53. So they have two second-rounders, one of them being ours. They could technically give us back our original second-rounder if we got pick 50. But there are three potential trade partners that we know there's familiarity with. We know that they have done that in the past, and we know that maybe they can make those type of moves. So continuing in with the conversation about why the New Orleans Saints don't trade back a lot, here's what Mickey Loomis said. I think there are cases where dropping back makes some sense to get more picks. I just think in our case, most of the time has been a move too far back. If you move back 2, 3, or 4 spots, the level of play is similar. If you move back 8 to 10, you're often dropping down a class. It's hard for me to grasp getting a lesser player talent-wise. My counter argument to Mickey Loomis here is, historically, his scouting department over the past 10 years has actually done the best in mid-round selections. That's where they keep finding their consistent hits. That isn't saying that they can't find success and that you're not more likely to find success in the first round, because that's absolutely true. That said, I personally would trust our scouting department to have an extra second and third round pick or something if that meant trading back 10 spots in the first. But Loomis is kind of talking here like, you've got to show me great value, and I don't think you're going to see a lot of that. But there is your answer. Now, here's a big one that a lot of y'all have asked about. Are the New Orleans Saints looking about moving into the third round because they don't have a third-round pick? Here's what Loomis said. It's a big gap from their pick at 45 all the way to 150. I wouldn't say we're spending a lot of time thinking about that right now. The way the draft is structured currently, we do the first round on Thursday, second and third on Friday. So then we have a whole evening to strategize and about moving forward into the third or fourth round. Part of what goes into what players are available and do we really want to move up. When you have 4 fifth-rounders, it gives us the opportunity to take a couple of those and bump it up. We won't be thinking about it until we know who's available. Another kind of non-answer, because that would imply that, you kind of need to have a guy ready. And generally, if you build a draft board at the NFL level, you've got a name, kind of like a cloud of 100 to 150 names that you want on your team. So you should have somebody already with a grade and considering, hey, I need to maybe do this. I maybe need to go after that. But maybe that's not how they're approaching it. Again, vagueness is going to be expected and normal, not necessarily good. But I don't want him giving it away, right? So, also, Paul says Mickey's ready to be fleeced again by Philly. Here's what would be fleecing. If you trade pick 14 for pick 22, which is what they have, so you move back 8 spots, but then you only let Philly give you, let's see what all Philly has this year. So Philly has got 2 seconds, and then they don't have anything until the 4th. So getting fleeced by Philly would say, hey, you give us your first round, we'll give you our first round, and then Philly only gives us a 4th this year and then a 3rd next year. All right, that would be getting fleeced. Hardcore. Absolutely just disgusting. Why would you let that happen? But I do think that Philly wants to move up. I really do. I think Philly wants to be aggressive. They're a team with a winning record, and they don't have that many gaping holes. So the fact that they have these later round picks, or later in the round picks, they would probably want to move up for the same reason that Loomis talks about drafting in the earlier spots. Right? Now, here's the good part of this when we come to the draft and what value might be there / isn't there. Number 1, offensive tackle class. Mickey Loomis had this to say about the OTs. I think it's a good year for OTs. That's probably the way I'd put it. I think everyone would say the offensive line is a position of strength in this draft and wide receivers, but there's players at every position. It's just a matter of how we look at them compared to other clubs. Again, ending it with a non-answer, leaving a lot of smoke and mirrors, a lot of room for wiggling out. But I do agree with them. In fact, we spent a lot of time talking about that here on the podcast for those that we have looked at, in that there is a lot of depth and value at offensive line for the New Orleans Saints to potentially select, whether it's pick 14 or even in the second round. I do think this is a deep class. I don't think that the offensive tackles have a lot of like blue chip talent right now, like ready to go day one. But I do feel like there's good talent. I do feel like there is a reason, or there's value, and there's definitely something that you could come out with a win here, even if you're not picking immediately. Like, at least, even if you're not picking at 14, you can still find a quality piece to add to your team because of the depth there. No matter who you end up taking, there is going to be some level of obscurity to the pick and unknown, because there are all of these guys' talent at the same time needing some more development. With New Orleans having a new offensive line coach, a new offensive coordinator, and question marks at both tackle spots, it leaves a lot of room for being uncertain. Right. But let's keep on, because I do think that Mickey did drop some things here worth bringing on. So here is them answering a big one. How far down their board are they willing to go to fill a need? So how much are they willing to go need at a position versus BPA? And he says, we're not going to vary too far. It might be 2 spots at most, but we haven't picked anybody where there's a big gap just to fill a need. Need is a variable, but it's not the variable. And this is an answer that I absolutely love from Mickey Loomis, because I do believe the best teams in terms of drafting draft BPA. And going by a study that was just released, and I put this on Twitter, or X, formerly known as Twitter, for those that haven't seen it, but I put this study out. This was done by Betway, and they found that when they analyzed the past 10 seasons of draft, the NFL, just as a whole, they found that the New Orleans Saints had the 7th best draft record, as in Pro Bowlers, all-time, or rookie teams, all pros, etc., taking all draft picks into consideration across every team and grading them based on specific, accolade values. New Orleans was the 7th best. Kansas City was number 1, which is not really a surprise. Los Angeles number 2, Dallas number 3, Detroit number 4. Also, no surprise really in that order. Baltimore Ravens, Chargers, and then the Saints, followed very closely by the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I would agree with that. I think that you have had moments where the drafts haven't been that great. I think part of that is just you see the first-round picks not being what you need them to be, like Trevor Penning and Peyton Turner. So you immediately go fail, but historically the Saints have been doing quite well recently, especially when they overhauled their draft process back in like 2016. So the fact that they stick to their guns on BPA, I think, is the right strategy. I think other teams that we just named on that list do the same thing. Now, I'm not trying to convince every Saints fan to believe that the New Orleans Saints are infallible when it comes to drafting, but I do think that's a good sign when an unbiased third party takes a look at every team and says, hey, here's how we graded them, and we have no dog in the fight. So it's very easy for us when we cover the New Orleans Saints to look here and say, oh, they really stink because they missed here. But unless you actually take the time to get scope and look, hey, how's everybody done? It's easy to just sit there and be a little extra hard on your hometown team if you feel like they've had certain failings. And I do feel like there are some issues that they could have addressed better, and there are some ideology aspects that I don't necessarily agree with. Like I talked about the fact that this team has a bad habit of not drafting enough players. I've talked about that pretty in-depthly, I would think. I've gone as far as to say that I think the team needs to draft a minimum of 7 to 9 players every single draft. However, if you look in recent drafts, 2022 to be a recent example, you only drafted 5 players. Now, you might have had 3 players in the top 50, and 2 of those have worked out. And statistically, that's actually really good. But you only had 5 picks. Lante Taylor and Chris Olave have worked out. Trevor Penning so far has not. But because you've only got those 2 names, and you didn't really pick a lot of people, it looks like a mess of a draft. But if you look at the years where they've picked a lot of names, you usually find good. Go back to 2020 where they picked 4 players and only 1 is a consistent starter. You're going to have the natural tendency to go, they failed. I think the key for New Orleans is drafting a lot, which is one of the reasons I want them to draft by trading back. I think that's how they get a better team. Again, this is, can you convince Mickey Loomis that this is a valid and viable strategy? And while we're talking about trades, be remiss to not bring up Marshon Lattimore, Marshon Lattimore is somebody that has gotten a lot of trade talk over the past couple months. I would actually say the past few months, really since January, even December, we started talking about this. Here's what he said specifically about that. He says, listen, everybody's tradable. It just depends on the offer that you get. It's not very common. I'm not one who likes to do a lot of trades. I don't like trading players who've been contributors for us. I like maximizing our roster with the guys we've got, but we've made trades before. There's too many what ifs here. If something was imminent, well, I probably still wouldn't tell you guys. We'll also say that Mickey Loomis and Dennis Allen have both recently talked about Marshon Lattimore being a key part of this roster. So going by that, again, it's not a definite, and you can't really expect him to say definite. If anything, you'd call him a bad GM if he was giving you definite answers 2 days before the draft. But with that in mind, I do think that New Orleans Saints are probably going to hold on to Marshon Lattimore, which is what we determined kind of coming into free agency. Nothing had been done by that point, and it just looks like you're going to keep him, because unless you get a very good offer, what's the point of moving off of Lattimore? And this offseason, we saw a starter, high-quality corner get traded for a third-rounder. I don't think New Orleans is making a good move when they do that. I think New Orleans would be better off just keeping Lattimore. Now, on that, Calvin says, do you think Lattimore could be traded draft night in the way of A.J. Brown was traded to the Eagles on draft night? It's certainly possible. But I would say this, the precedent that was just set this offseason for a third-rounder for a quality starter, I don't think is enough to move New Orleans' needle. Second round, maybe. First round, definitely. Third round, no. And even the second rounder, I probably would not be super happy about, but I probably wouldn't scream about it either. I would just be like, well, that's the Mickey Loomis trade. I don't feel like we got enough value, but it's not terrible. I, at this point, think that Marshon Lattimore will be on the roster and won't be going anywhere this season. I think that, sure, that will lower his long-term value, but at the same time, I'm not upset about it. So, I'm curious what chat thinks. Definitely the price is right. That's what Mark Jean-Marie says. I think that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that logic, right? There's absolutely nothing wrong with saying, hey, if you can get value, go for it. I just don't feel like they're going to get a lot of that value. I don't feel like it's going to be an offer that's there where somebody's sitting needing a corner, and there are teams that need corners. I don't really see anybody out there that's saying, hey, let's give them a second-round pick. And just to think of teams that could probably use that. You know, I don't know, Washington maybe. I think Philly is a team that's looking at corners. I would actually not be surprised at all if Philly didn't draft a corner in the first round this year. But in theory, you can get one of those second rounders from Philly. I don't know if I trust New Orleans on that one. That's a tricky one. I know Washington needs a corner. I think that there are several teams you can argue can definitely use high-quality, talented corners. There's definitely not a shortage of need across the NFL for that. I just don't really know if New Orleans is going to be able to find what they're looking for trade-wise. Another team would be the Packers. I actually think Marshon would fit really well with the Packers and what they do stylistically up there. And the Packers do have pick 41 because they got that from the Jets. Packers actually have, I think, 3 picks in the top 50. So, yeah, options are there. But do I think New Orleans goes that route? Probably not. Packers also have 2 third-round picks. Packers, I think, are going in this draft with 10 picks. And we're not talking about them having 4 seventh-rounders. They've actually got a pretty nice little rollout. I mean, look at it here. Yeah, they've got the 25th, the 41st, the 58th, the 88th, and the 91st. So they have 5 picks inside the top 91. That's a good, healthy place to be when you're drafting. Now, obviously, the Packer fans would like a better record than 9-8. Sound familiar, Saints fans? But I would argue when you got 5 picks inside the top 91, you're not in a bad spot. I would say draft-wise, that's pretty daggum good. The only thing I would rather have is maybe a slightly higher first rounder. But when you're 9-8, and then you've got 5 picks in the top 91 compared to New Orleans, who has 2 picks inside the top 91, and 2 picks inside the top 100, and 2 picks inside the top 130, it's a good spot to be. So, if I had a dream, who would I just trade all my draft picks for if I could just trade them? I would love to be where Green Bay's at right now. 10 draft picks with 5 of them being the top 91 picks. A lot of potential for success there. Obviously, no guarantees. The thing about the draft is there's absolutely no guarantees. So, yeah. What's up, Tron? Good to see you. Last but not least, let's cover some of these final things from Mickey. Loomis, how are they going to approach free agency after the draft? We're going to keep looking. There's still good players out there that haven't found a home yet, so I think we're going to be in that mix. You go into the draft thinking you're going to get certain positions, and even with UDFAs, but afterwards you find you probably still have gaps, so you look at what's available. So basically him being very open, and I would expect him to do this, he's pretty open that the New Orleans Saints will be heavy in the free agent portal as soon as the draft ends. I think that the Saints, I think there's a lot of people that the New Orleans Saints could target right now that are still available. I think that if I'm New Orleans, I'm staring down even guys that you've had on your team. For example, Andres Pete. If you don't manage to find the guy, Andres Pete's an option. I feel like there are other valuable guys. Like if you need to find a starter this year, like you just don't trust in Ryan Ramczyk, but you want a cheap veteran, Chris Hubbard, offensive tackle that was with the Titans last year, is coming off an injury. He's 33, but had some quality starts, right? Calais Campbell, if that man doesn't retire at 40 years old, right? Another good name. Another good name. I think there are several options for New Orleans in that portal should they want to explore it after the draft. And I think that if you're the Saints, you're also looking at veterans who can contribute as role players like Andres Pete again. I'm not necessarily saying he's coming back. I'm saying that he is probably one of the bigger name, both in literal size and notoriety available at offensive tackle and offensive line. It's just, can you find consistency there? Like, can you find anything in the draft to make you confident that you don't need those guys? I would definitely be looking at them to address those positions potentially here. I think that's quite plausible. We'll see. What about putting Penning at right tackle and bringing back Pete, drafting OT to compete? Personally, would hate that idea. Don't like it at all. Don't understand the idea of just moving Penning around. If he's not good where he's at, he's not magically going to get better by moving. I think moving a player as an argument is fine if they have good technique and maybe they just don't translate physically as well to a certain position. That's not Penning's problem. He doesn't struggle with the athletic side of things. He struggles with the technique side of things. No matter what position you put him at, he's going to struggle until he actually gets those sorted. And if you have a guy who's bad technique and you can either has the potential to be an elite left tackle or an elite left guard or even a right tackle, you're choosing left tackle. If it doesn't work, then it doesn't work. But moving Pete inside doesn't fix his problems. Moving him to the right side doesn't fix his problems. These guys can get Pete to actually fix his problems. If it was an athletic thing, like, hey, we're talking about this guy being 6'2", doesn't have long enough reach, isn't really good with his slide, maybe doesn't have enough power in his step, any of those things, sure, maybe moving him to guard would make more sense. But I don't think any of those are Pete or Penning's problem. Penning's problem is the man just has crap technique, right? Like Andres Pete had a very legit argument for moving him inside. I don't think that's the case for Penning. Penning just has to be good. And that's just not working. Now, that's just my take. If anybody's out there saying move him, I understand it. I'm just not on that train. But I understand why the argument gets brought up. Personally, I look at him and I just say, he's not what you've wanted him to be. You try things, see what happens. So, we'll see. Yeah. Pete is solid. We can't expect a world beater to replace him. Sign him now. Maybe not. Maybe you can't expect that. But I also don't think anybody's really barking up Pete's tree right now. And there are definitely cap reasons to sign guys later in the process. So, again, we'll just see how that ends up playing out. I don't think it's going to be something that is high on the priority list because they need to find somebody who is long-term. That doesn't mean I'm against Pete. Again, I'm actually very much in favor of bringing in Andres Pete again if you don't find anything. I just don't think that helps you at the moment. I think that there are reasons to continue looking and just focus on the draft. And if Pete gets snatched up, he does. But if Pete was going to get snatched up, he probably would have been snatched up. I think Pete's getting looked at the same way a lot of other guys in his kind of like realm looked at. He's a guy who struggled with injuries his entire career. He's deep into the 30s for an offensive lineman now. I know he's not super old, but he is old. He is very old for just an NFL player. The guy turns 31 this year. And I'm sorry, that's old. Now, for us, regular folk having day jobs and out there living life, it's not old at all. We're talking about somebody who's been playing the position at a high level for a decade. That's pretty old. And when you've had the inability to play a full season your entire career, now we'll give him credit. 2023, he played 16 games. That's in a normal old school year, that would have been a full season. Yeah, he is coming off a healthier season where he played well. He still dealt with nagging injuries. I mean, he's going to be 31 years old with a pretty extensive injury history. He's probably going to sit there. And I think the longer he sits, the better it ends up being priced out for New Orleans. But I do agree that you do need to find something. Like, you absolutely cannot go into the training camp portion with your roster being what it currently is. And for those that don't know the current roster for the New Orleans Saints offensive line, here it is. Trevor Penning, James Hurst, Eric McCoy, Cesar Ruiz, Ryan Ramczyk, Landon Young, Nick Saldiveri, Mark Evans II, and then they did pick up Olasiamika Udo? I can't pronounce your name, sir. I'm sorry. They did pick him up as a low-end free agent. That's fine. But none of those names in the background make you confident. And even though I have been very adamant that I like Nick Saldiveri, I actually believe Nick Saldiveri can be a pretty good starter if he's developed. That was the key. He had to be developed. He was a mid-round pick that needed a lot of work, but I love some of the things that I saw from him. And maybe he can be your interior player of the future at guard. It's possible. But I knew that he needed work when he got drafted, and that hasn't changed. Like, they are still going to have to make sure that he develops into a quality starter. So no matter where you're at, New Orleans needs the looks. It needs the looks. I do want to mention real quick, Zion Williamson. Love to you, man. You've been doing great at the end of the season for the Pellies. Really hope you're available before this playoff series is over. I still believe that this team has too many leaders. What I mean by that is, I don't know, and I am not a basketball guy. I've said this, but I do want to say this about the Pelicans. I feel like the Pelicans are better when there's either no Zion or no Brandon Ingram. I just think the two of them, I'm not saying either of them are bad players. Actually, the contrary. I think both are really, really good. I just don't think they work on the court well together. And I also think there's a coaching problem. I just don't believe in Willie Green as a NBA Finals winning head coach. But when Zion was by himself with no BI, Pelicans felt unstoppable that last week of the season. And honestly felt good most of the season, but there was that 4-game losing streak that was just really, really bad. I think they either need to devote themselves to BI or devote themselves to Zion and pick one and then get out from the other one. That's what I see when I watch them try to play playoff caliber teams, whether it be the Lakers, whether it be Oklahoma City, who they're playing now, even though you didn't see Zion there. BI could not dominate the interior. He could not dominate the paint. There was nobody who could break into that. And then New Orleans has a problem where even though they are a good three-point shooting team, a lot of times they're a good three-point shooting team because they have clear looks because Zion clears out the lane. He dives in and he gets it to folks. He kicks it out. You had CJ McCollum went 9 for 22 the other night, right? So when your shooters aren't hitting their shots, you've got to be able to dominate inside. And even though they had good rebounding, they won the boards. I think they won the turnover battle, but they couldn't clutch and couldn't close it because what matters in the playoffs? Defense. And even though they played good defense, you've got to be able to beat the opposing defense, and they didn't. And it's very rare that you see NBA matches these days where nobody's scoring 100 points. I mean, it happens. I'm just saying. I think New Orleans needs to just convince themselves it's okay to not have two stars that play next to each other. You don't need an elite 3 and an elite 4 right next to each other. You can have one and then use that money to build around. Because going against Oklahoma City is a very tough matchup, right? OKC is the better team in every way on paper. New Orleans has got a good defense. They've got to be able to dominate inside. And they didn't, so they lost. They still, I'm looking at the numbers here. Turnover, New Orleans had one more turnover, right? But blocks, right the same. Steals, right the same. Assists, right the same. Field goal percentage was lower. Your three-point was lower, so you didn't have guys hitting their threes consistently. And you out-rebounded. You had more opportunities, but you weren't able to close out. And that is a very good, just very well built, in my opinion, team over in OKC. There's a reason they're the number 1 seed. I mean, they don't have the star power other teams have. I mean, they have star power, but it's not the same MVP level star power we talk about teams having. But they're just built solid, like all the way down to the bench. Everybody contributes. Everybody's good. And the Pellies got to find a way to break through there. Got to find a way. So there's my thoughts on the Pelicans. You got to pick Zion or BI. And to be honest, I'd pick Zion just because he's younger, but with his injury history, BI has an injury history. Both of them, it's tough to get too excited. It's tough to get too excited. That's kind of where I'm at. It's kind of where I'm at. I want the Saints to continue to improve their offensive and defensive line. Still want them to address safety. I'm very curious the fact that Mickey Loomis talks about wide receiver being deep in this NFL draft, because I've talked about them needing a split end, and I'm very curious who maybe they have their eye on there. But he definitely called out 2 major positions of need for New Orleans. Offensive line and arguably wide receiver are both very big needs, and very curious to see how it plays out. But it's been a great show. We're trying to keep them a little bit shorter as the draft comes up in here in the offseason, because not everybody wants an hour-and-a-half show. Hope you all have enjoyed it. If you have, hit the like button on your way out. Who dat? God bless. Love every single one of you. Would love to hear your Pelicans and Saints opinions. You can hit me up on Twitter, Facebook, or in our Discord. Who dat? God bless. We'll catch you on the next one. Deuces. That's me.